get a lot of requests and topics coming in. 2 out of every 3 right now is around AI. That's what people want to hear and see. Now, that being said, depending how you stand on it, you got to know what's there. And I wouldn't be the first in line to sign up for something like that. But on the flip side of it, you don't want to be last either. You want to be able to keep up with the competition and see what's there.
Welcome in, everybody. You're listening to Wrestling Payments, a podcast where we help payment professionals contend with the challenges of modernizing their payments operations and identifying ways to build for the future. If you're interested in payments innovation and modernization, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into it.
And welcome to Wrestling Payments. Today, my guest is Rich Carty.
Yep. Thanks, Joe.
Excellent.
Thanks for having us.
You are with Remedy. What does Remedy do? I know I met you a year ago. You're one of those people that you meet and you're immediately friends with. What does Remedy do?
Yeah, I appreciate that and our newfound friendship, Joe. Like the rest of the niche team, it was pretty easy to gravitate and speak with at some of the local events. But, our group Remedy, we're a consulting group that assists financial institutions with their technology vendor contracts. So, a majority of them will take a look at the core technology as the renewal approaches. We'll fight and negotiate for better pricing on the contracts, better terms, strategically align maybe a different vendor if needed, or maybe upgrade with what they have to their potential goals to, as they grow, or if they have kind of something coming down the pipeline. So that's kind of where we make our mark with industry, I guess.
We are on YouTube, so are you limited in any geography?
We work throughout the United States. So I'm up in the Northeast in Massachusetts. Most of our team is situated in the Midwest, just outside of Milwaukee, but we do cover most of the country.
Okay, so I have two podcasty questions, and then we can get into the real meat of this. The first one's easy, right? Wrestling Payments. Did you ever have a wrestling, favorite wrestler, or know anyone who has a favorite wrestler?
It's funny you say that. I definitely watched a little bit of wrestling growing up, and one of our family friends was a gym teacher at a nearby high school. And I guess her colleague looked a lot like Hulk Hogan.
No.
And so they would put on a huge fundraising event each year. I was probably 5th, 6th grade, so right in the heart of really getting into it. And I always thought that was the coolest, thing. He looked just like him. He'd ride the motorcycle right in, they'd rent the ring, and they'd do all these performances, and the high school kids could all, kind of perform. So naturally, I kind of gravitated towards the Hogan Mania movement in that sense. But
what fun. That's so fun.
And so I followed it for a couple of years, but I'd have to say, The Rock then kind of, won me over as I got a little bit older and so forth. Now look at what he's doing, But that was probably my first introduction. And if I had to say a favorite, that would be where I landed.
Excellent. Got that out of the way. Great. The next one is not a trick question, but a little bit of a trick question. And I stole it from the payments professor. Did you imagine yourself doing what you do as a kid? Is this what you always wanted to do? How did you get in this industry?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, too, because, I have 2 young kids right now, and it's fun always kind of asking them, where they see themselves and what they want to do when they grow up, right? My son wants to be a football player. My daughter wants to be, the next Taylor Swift. So, if you ask me at their age, it might be a little bit different. But, as I got older, I think I always wanted to kind of be in a consulting type field. I think I didn't know what I wanted to do. I've been in financial services and an array of different sales type capacities. Obviously, I'm on the sales side with Remedy, but I think, within our services, we're able to provide something that's assisting our clients. We're able to save them money or protect them against what they might not see in these contracts. So, it is a feel-good story. We're able to obviously operate as a business, but to answer that question, I'd say, I think I've kind of found a path that, I love the arena we work in. And, I always said consulting. I didn't know where that would be, but it definitely seems to be fitting the mold at this point.
How did you get here? It's always a great question, I think. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to talk to you about my experience with conversions, right? Because until I met you, I didn't know a firm like you existed. And, it was always there was always that conversation where it was almost like it was whispered. Oh, I didn't see you at the training this year. Oh, we're in a conversion. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening? And the other side of that business that we always saw, and if you're not in the payments industry, this is a big deal. The other, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not, the other thing we always saw with contracts like this was that they were locked in. They were locked in, so they would finish a conversion and that was it. They didn't have a decision to make for the next 15 years, which was like 15 years. And certainly we as niche were coming in because they were calling because their system couldn't do something, but they were stuck in that scenario. So it was nice, you were the superhero I didn't know existed when I met you. Can you talk a little bit more of what how this works, how the industry is working today, what you're seeing, anything you want to share? I'm sure the audience would love.
Absolutely. And, kind of piggybacking off what I mentioned, what I wanted to be when I grow up, right? So I came into Remedy about 3 years ago, definitely a learning curve to learn a little bit more specific to the banking industry. And, on the flip side, our partner and team have a lot of experience specific to that in that sense. And so, I think, especially in the contract space. And so, what I think a lot of people know, the typical contract for a course specific is anywhere, we've seen 3, but 5 and 7 is typically where we'd probably advise our groups to kind of stick with. There are some vendors pushing 10. And to that point, you might have a senior leader leaving a group and they make this decision and the new person comes in and they can't do anything for say 8-9 years because now it's taken care of. On one hand, yeah, I'm sure that's nice to not have to worry about it. But if you don't like how something's working or, you can't make that change until that expiration does come up. So to your point, yeah, they are locked in that sense. And, again, from my personal experience, when I came in, I just, geez, that's kind of tough. If you, on my side, if I sign up for car insurance and it seems like the rates are pretty high, I'm only locked in for that year before I can shop it around. For these FIs, if they are locked in, that's a long time. And if you don't do it right at that point, you'll be feeling, not so great about that and kind of stuck. So, I think a lot more diligence is being put in. There's a lot more, how can I do this the right way, at the right time? And, that's what we hopefully try to educate, the FIs around the country and what they can do.
Are there contracts on the rise? It seems like everyone's involved in some sort of conversion at this point. And I don't know if we have a couple of members that I guess they're very active. They're in mergers right now. So, and I engage with them a lot and they've been in the process of conversion now because they're merging. But can you give me a little bit of the life cycle of where you step in and help out?
Sure.
Do you help out in that merger situation or is that there's no choices there?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, also on the conversion side of it, they do take a while from the beginning and all the way through with the implementation side. It can kind of start to say, I think the stat was that ICBA threw out in the banking community, 15 to 20% of groups want to actually look after doing a conversion, an RFP, to see what's there. But at the end of the day, I think only 2 to 3% actually make a change. Right. So once you see what the undertaking is and the time, the commitment that's there, it's a lot, there's a lot there. That's not to say you don't want to do the due diligence aspect of it and see what else is out there. But that's where you kind of talk a little bit about what tech vendor really needs to be changed or updated. Is it the full core or can we kind of, plug and play with what you have in place and make that better? And to answer, I guess, maybe on the timing side of it, again, from what I've heard now and what I've seen is these take not only just the straight renewals, but if you are going to make a change, it just takes longer and longer in terms of getting on a vendor's schedule to see a demo or, you finally sign and say, hey, we're going to make that change. There's a long timeline that does look like. So, we caution, financial institutions to if they just want to do a renewal, you're probably looking 2.5 years in advance of that expiration date. If you're actually looking to, RFP, see these demos and get it on the calendar, you're probably 3 years in advance, especially on the core side.
Right. So I have to start planning 3 years before the contract's up to be safe.
Yeah. So as much as people say, hey, we just signed one, we did a 5-year contract, you're 2 years into it. If you actually are serious, you're right back to it, right? You're not stuck, but you're now spending more time in terms of what you want to put into place.
I'm a good guesser, and sometimes I'm a good guesser, and sometimes I'm completely wrong. Here's my guess. My guess is you're good for if I'm exploring a new solution, or even if I'm renewing my existing solution. You can help in both situations, no?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I will say our team, there are other consultants in the space, but, I think what a majority of, people like us want to do is, see what the best option is. So whether they want us to come in and kind of give them a needs analysis to see what's there and what's working, or if they actually want to do the full RFP, if they want us to help with the tech demos, we're open to kind of working with that institution and see what works best for them, how much they want to take on themselves, how much guidance or direction they want us to do. We're people organization, so we have to work with them to see what fits best for them, because not every contract and not every technology is going to be a fit just based off of an asset size alone, right? So we got to get to know them, they got to get to know us.
Let's look under the curtain, right? I really wanted to start this podcast to look behind the curtain, like at Oz, or the secret sauce. What are you seeing? Any trends in features folks are interested in and or onboarding, but really just interested in? What has anything changed over the past year?
I think one of the big things that was kind of released from the ABA side of the house is they did a core survey. That was really popular. I want to say they got responses from over 800 banks throughout the country. And they released it in spring 2025. There was actually a core group in the Northeast that actually had enough responses. I think they had to have 5% of the respondents to qualify, because there's, an NA category, and they scored really well. They did really well in that sense. But we'll see, and it's not to knock them in any way, but when people have success and things grow with a technology vendor, sometimes that service starts to drop off because now there's a lot more needs on the other side of the house. Mm-hmm. So, what we're seeing is that when people do make that change, that's not new just within the year. The grass isn't always necessarily greener. It's just what you need to look for and so forth in that sense. Again, is it worth moving the needle to do it or not? You never know, but it's good to get those data points, but then read through that to see what that actually means.
And you said that was the ABA?
Correct. Yep.
Great. Interesting. We've seen a lot. I mean, if you asked about AI 3 years ago, AI was a thing, right? It was AI, people working on AI. With the rise of ChatGPT and this year, it seems like everything is on steroids as far as AI. Are you seeing any attitude towards AI that is either don't want anything to do with it, or let's use it where it's appropriate, or I guess the other thing, give me anything with AI in it, I'll take it all.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any trend to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'll go to events throughout the year, like a lot of vendors will, and obviously, the banks and credit unions attend. You got to know what's out there. So, at a majority of these conferences, like you're going to get an economic update. You're going to get what's going on with AI, and then probably something to do with fraud. Those are probably your 3 biggest topics you're seeing everywhere there. We host our own podcast, Bank Talk, really popular. So we get a lot of requests and topics coming in. 2 out of every 3 right now is around AI. That's what people want to hear and see. Now, that being said, we're depending how you stand on it, you got to know what's there. And I wouldn't be the first in line to sign up for something like that. But on the flip side of it, you don't want to be last either. You want to be able to keep up with the competition and see what's there. Kind of piggybacking with that, and to your other question is, there's a lot of, new generation type cores coming out. It's very similar, do you really want to be first to do that or not? How are those really going to integrate compared to, say, the 3 legacy cores that are there, or some of the ones that have been around a little bit longer? So there's going to be a lot of changes, and it's probably hard to upkeep with that. But I think, using local resources and talking to your inner peer circles, that's going to be the best way to kind of see who's had the experience and see what they've heard, to take on whether it is an AI type model or a newer technology in that sense.
I have 2 quick questions, but I used to listen to the radio an awful lot, and I wanted to create a button that would rewind the radio 10 seconds, just because I was mostly listening and I missed something and I wanted to go back. And if I was listening to this podcast, I would say, what was the name of your podcast? If someone was looking for your podcast, what's the name of it?
Yeah, absolutely. 3 seconds. Bank Talk Podcast. You got it.
Bank
One
Talk
word, Bank
Podcast.
Talk. Yep.
All right. That is one of the things I would have been, what was that? I missed it. Excellent. Bank Talk Podcast.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And like I said, we always look for new topics. Like you're saying, AI is very topical, so we've had that. But we've done some great episodes. Last year I was able to host the president down in the Maryland area, talking about how he was taking a percentage of a money market fund and donating that to the Key Bridge rebuild, right?
Yeah.
So we do a lot of different, things that, might not be relevant to, that specific time or area of the country, but at the same time, it's just something else that can kind of, put in the back of your brain and say, oh, I remember hearing something about that. How does that work? Or that's interesting. We just, subject matter experts are out there and everything, and it's always interesting to hear something different.
No, I've listened to your podcast when I was starting this all up, so I did get a flavor for it. I just wanted the audience to have that 10-second rewind. So you mentioned something that was legacy or new technology. Any thoughts, anything you want to share on, I can imagine legacy, right? For ACH, typically the systems have been around forever, and it's like an add-on on an add-on on an add-on. Whereas building it from scratch is new technology. That's just my viewpoint of it. Can you give the professional viewpoint on, the differences?
Yeah. And again, being on the sales side and a little bit newer, compared to the rest of our team, I'll give you kind of my perspective, but it's inevitable. Technology needs to change. At the beginning, there's a lot of research and funds being put into technology. And then at some point it kind of plateaus, and then, they take a lot less resources and funding out, and it'll start to diminish, right? Customer service goes down. And so then they rebuild it. It's that's just the evolution of technology, whether it's 15, 20, 30 plus years. So I think in the core side of the house, that there's some new generation cores. That's a topic that we're hearing a lot. We have some clients that have started to go down that path with it. If you were to ask our consultants, is it ready for prime time right now for everyone? Probably not the case, but, I think if you are looking at doing it, how are you going to implement that and, dip your toes in the water with it first, right? From what we've seen, you're not getting a cost reduction on it, which I would think you should, but, if it's newer technology, you're still going to be paying a premium for that. And then you're the first to experience any issues and whatever comes its way there, because again, you're lining up thousands of lines of code to, integrate and kind of go forward to run the bank and credit union, if you will. And so it can obviously be daunting, let alone if you're doing a conversion to something brand new, a lot more to take in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We had a member, and they were a podcast guest. They were great. Ingrid Herbert, I think she's speaking at that Faster Payments conference. She was like, I don't know how many podcasts you've been on. She was like a walking quotable. Everything she said was like, oh my God, that was great. Let me write that down. Oh, that was great. Let me write that down. She was great. They're just, I don't know. I mean, she was a natural. But they ran into the situation about upgrading. And they chose to actually build their own. So they came out with Mascoma Tech. And their I mean, I don't know if that's of interest to you. They are a core, a newer core. This thing that I run into, not in the banking industry, but in the association industry, we go on board member databases, right? Member database, same sort of process as a core for you.
Yeah.
But we had a consultant on our database project. It's the accounting for us, and we are very happy with QuickBooks. Many of these member database programs have their own accounting, but it doesn't meet all the features. So I would imagine it's the same story with will this new system, new technology, meet all the requirements that my old technology did? Even if it's in different ways, it's missing. My current accounting system doesn't let me make a journal entry. Can't do it, doesn't exist, which is really weird. From an accounting perspective, journal entries are everyday things. So any stories around that at all, as far as how the newer systems, newer cores are adapting, growing, catching on?
Yeah, I think, you got to think too, when you're making a change, whether it is a newer technology or any technology, think of the way the core touches everyone that works within the bank and anyone outside of the bank, So it's important, and people know this, but it's important to understand what disruptions there are potentially going to be. The input from, the tellers to your finance side or whatever it may be, getting the input from those teams to see what's most important and what hasn't worked and what could be there, we want that input as, those groups are making those decisions, because that's what's going to affect you on the day-to-day side. And again, when you're locked into the contract, you're there working through it. You're not going to want to do a conversion, sign a 7-year contract, and then convert after that. Right. Very rarely have we seen or heard that, but it has happened. It's just constant change is never, wanted. So, I think that's the big thing, is really kind of having department heads getting a read of what's needed, kind of going through that. And then that's going to help you maybe make that decision along the way, and hopefully it fits. Two
Not silly, but two final questions. When instant payments came along, is that part of your process, or has there been are people asking that question about onboarding a faster payment system at all? Or is that part of just the whole story? People are probably leading that with our conversations when we get engaged, but once the consultants do get involved, that is gonna get brought up. We ask for pain points, we ask what works well, how are these systems working? And, in a negotiation, you don't want to go in with 200 pain points to negotiate through. That's just way too many. So you highlight what's there. So we do hear about payments, once we kind of get into the nitty gritty of it, just like any other technology or whatever else they want to integrate with what they're trying to accomplish. But yeah, it is brought up for sure. Okay. And this is my last real person, like when I'm interviewing a hire question, but is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked?
I think there's a lot of different ways to kind of take these conversations. I mean, I could tell a lot of different war stories from our side. I think the big thing is, like, I talked about the word due diligence, and I talked about how there's more and more people using the consultants. I think it's almost doubled in the last 10, 15 years, where I think 65% of groups are looking to a consultant in some way as they either do a negotiation or sort through who they might want to be selecting. Mm-hmm. And, again, that due diligence piece could, whether it's your board that's kind of asking for that or a new leader coming in, there's a lot to look at and consider. So, whether you make the change, whether it's just to kind of do a straight renewal, know that there are, someone like ourselves that can kind of just take a look at it. And if not us, then, at least go through that at the proper timing, so you don't get stuck in a corner to say, I just need to do an auto renewal or sign up for a 10-year renewal. There's a lot that goes into it. And as strong as you think a relationship may be with a vendor, that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the best price. There's a lot of stories we can talk about that, where, there's family members on the other side, they thought they were in a great spot, and we start looking through it, and there's millions on the table. So, again, like I said, with my broker for car insurance, I'd known him for 5 years, but once I shopped it around just out of curiosity, and he couldn't match it, and you end up, as strong as a relationship may be, sometimes the price is the final say.
Yeah, no, those are great points. Your insurance guy, your barber, people you trust as far as do something. Do you have time for maybe a quick war story? We usually go. This is a great length of a podcast, but if you had a war story, I would love a war story.
Sure. So I guess I'll just elaborate on that story that I talked about. So this was a smaller group with one of their vendors. And again, they had a family member. They'd been to that point, they had been on a core for about 30 years. It was, I think, a family friend, and they never really looked at it. And then, they just kind of said, it might be time. We had met them at an event, and I just, kind of talked about, like, listen, we can do a free look under the hood. We're not going to, sign a contract today, but why not at least look? Right? When's the last time you looked? He said, it's been 30 years. I said, well, we have our repository. We can give the Kelly Blue Book version. Take a look what's there, make sure it lines up. And no harm, no foul if not there. We at least did our part, and we know you're in good shape. And then, again, on the flip side of it, the term side, they were looking to do a little bit of growth. And so, then you can strengthen the terms, and whether you use an attorney or us, or then we can at least point you in a direction if you didn't want to and you have the time. And so, we got into, under the hood. And once we looked, there was a lot of dollars there, and they were blown away by it. They could not believe of what that looked like. And so with that, they were able to open a new branch with the extra dollars and have set up in some other motions. And so again, it's that's rewarding for me as a consultant to say, we're able to find dollars, protect them within the writing. And, again, then you build, like you and me, you build friendships and partnerships to, hopefully help them enhance those contracts and what they want to be doing moving ahead.
Excellent. That was great. And again, you were like an instant friend. I don't know if you knew, it was like we were old friends by the time we exited the exhibit hall.
That's
that
for
one
sure.
time I met you. Yeah, it was good. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm gonna please everyone remember to like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate it. Any final words?
Joe, thank you. I appreciate your friendship. I look forward to seeing you guys here in a few weeks. And, again, I appreciate having us on today. It was great talking to you again.
Excellent. No, I love the war stories. So let's maybe have another episode with war stories only.
I like that. We'll take that on when you're ready.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
On behalf of Niche, your trusted resource in payments, and our guests, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about payments innovation and modernization, you can find the Wrestling Payments Podcast on the podcast page of niche.org or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just search for Wrestling Payments in your podcast app. Thanks for listening.